"Don't you want to try the coffee I made especially for you, honey?" my husband James asked, his voice a little too saccharine, accompanied by an odd smile that seemed to stop short of reaching his eyes. I was seated at my sister-in-law Nina's meticulously arranged dining table, its gleaming surface reflecting the morning light in her sprawling Nashville home. This monthly family brunch, once a source of quiet enjoyment, had lately become a crucible of unease for me. The porcelain coffee cup directly in front of my place setting emitted a peculiar, almost acrid aroma, a metallic tang interwoven with something vaguely chemical, that made my stomach clench reflexively. My name is Christina, and at 29 years old, I found myself in the bewildering, deeply unsettling position of questioning whether the man I had pledged my life to, my own husband, was actively attempting to poison me. It was a thought so profoundly disturbing that, for months I had pushed it to the farthest corners of my mind, labeling it as paranoia, stress, anything but the terrifying truth. But after 3 years of marriage, punctuated by what could no longer be dismissed as mere coincidences, an alarming series of accidental food poisonings and mysterious bouts of illness, I had, out of sheer self-preservation, cultivated an acute sense of caution, especially whenever Nina was involved. She possessed an uncanny, almost theatrical ability to orchestrate situations that invariably left me either physically sick, deeply humiliated, or both. And it was always executed with that same, disarmingly innocent smile that James was now wearing, a smile that never quite reached the chilling depths of his gaze. "How thoughtful of you," I managed to reply, the words feeling like gritty sandpaper against my tongue. I forced a smile onto my own lips, hoping it looked convincing, while my mind raced frantically, trying to process the data points my senses were screaming at me. The strange, almost industrial scent wafting from the coffee cup was utterly unlike any coffee aroma I had ever encountered. It wasn't the rich, earthy smell of fresh beans, nor the bitter tang of over-roasted grounds. This was alien, unsettling. It brought back a vivid, nauseating memory. Last month, after drinking a seemingly innocuous cup of herbal tea at Nina's very same house, I had ended up doubled over in urgent care, fighting waves of dizziness and a searing abdominal pain that doctors could neither explain nor definitively diagnose. Nina, ever the picture of solicitous concern, had insisted, with a perfectly straight face, that she had prepared the tea in precisely the same manner she made it for herself every morning. Nina, poised and observant, watched me intently from across the polished table, her own untouched coffee cup sitting serenely before her. She absently stirred it with a delicate silver spoon, the quiet clink echoing in the otherwise silent room. James has become quite the barista lately. She purred, a subtle, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. "He's been practicing different brewing methods just for you." The way she lingered on those last 2 words, imbuing them with an unsettling emphasis, sent an immediate, icy shiver tracing a path down my spine. I had indeed noticed James's increasing frequency of visits to Nina's house over the past few months. He had initially explained it away, claiming they were discreetly collaborating on a grand surprise for our upcoming wedding anniversary, a sentimental gesture meant to commemorate our 3 years together. But something about his explanations had always felt inherently off kilter, a discordant note in an otherwise harmonious melody. There were the hushed, whispered conversations that abruptly ceased the moment I entered a room, creating an immediate, palpable silence. There were the strange, cryptic text messages I had fleetingly glimpsed on his phone screen, disappearing before I could fully comprehend their content. And now, this coffee radiating its peculiar ominous scent. Slowly, deliberately, I lifted the cup, feigning an exaggerated sniff, then brought it closer to my lips, pretending to take a sip. My gaze, however, remained fixed on James and Nina, studying their expressions with every fiber of my being. Their eyes met, a fleeting, almost imperceptible glance exchanged between them, a quick, conspiratorial flicker that lasted only a fraction of a second. But it was enough. It confirmed every burgeoning suspicion, every dark fear that had been festering in the pit of my stomach. Making a theatrical show of checking my phone, I let out a feigned sigh of mild annoyance. "Oh, would you look at that?" I exclaimed, standing up with a sudden, decisive movement that caused my chair to scrape loudly against the polished floor.
I completely forgot.
"I need to make a quick call for work. It's urgent." I turned to Nina, my voice pitched just right, apologetic but firm. "Nina, darling, would you mind terribly if I used your study? It's the only quiet place I can think of right now." As I moved past Nina's meticulously arranged place setting, I executed my pre-planned maneuver. I deliberately stumbled a slight, seemingly clumsy lurch that sent a ripple of momentary confusion through the air. In the swift, almost imperceptible chaos of steadying myself, my hand reached out, brushing against the coffee cups. With a practiced swiftness born of desperate anticipation, I switched our cups. Mine, the one with the metallic scent, now sat innocently before Nina. Her untasted cup, which I had carefully observed her stirring, was now in my possession.
I'm so sorry,
I exclaimed, feigning embarrassment as I straightened up, making sure to project an image of clumsy sincerity. "Goodness, I'm such a klutz sometimes, aren't I?" Nina waved away my apology with a tight, brittle smile that didn't quite reach her eyes either. "Just try not to break anything in the study, darling," she said, her voice betraying a hint of impatience, a subtle shift in her previously composed facade. I nodded, offering a quick, contrite smile, and hurried away, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a drumbeat of pure adrenaline. As I reached the study's doorway, I paused, glancing back. Through the open frame, I could still see them, frozen for a moment at the elegant table, their expressions a study in uneasy anticipation. Now, the agonizing waiting game began. I just had to watch. From the deceptive sanctuary of the study doorway, my gaze remained glued to the scene unfolding in the dining room. I watched, my breath caught in my throat as Nina, seemingly relaxed now that I was out of the immediate vicinity, reached for the coffee cup. The very cup that had been prepared with a sinister purpose. The cup now containing the suspicious brew intended for me. She lifted it to her lips, and my stomach clenched so violently that I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Part of me, the part that still clung to a shred of the shared family bond we once pretended to have, wanted desperately to stop her. To burst out, to warn her of the danger, to scream, "Don't drink that?" But a colder, more pragmatic part of me, fueled by a relentless need for irrefutable proof, held me captive. I needed to know the truth. I had spent too many agonizing nights in sterile emergency rooms, too many hours doubled over in unimaginable pain, always after sharing meals or drinks with them. The pattern was undeniable now. It had become a horrifying, undeniable thread weaving through the fabric of my life. It hadn't always been like this insidious web of suspicion and fear. When I first met James 3 years ago at a mutual friend's wedding in Nashville, he had been everything I had ever dreamed of: charming, attentive, utterly captivating. Nina, his older sister, had also seemed genuinely welcoming, even enthusiastic about our burgeoning relationship. She had extended warm invitations to countless family gatherings, seemingly eager to fold me into the Anderson clan. She had even offered to help plan our wedding, positioning herself as a supportive, helpful future sister-in-law. But looking back now, with the benefit of agonizing hindsight, I could see the subtle, insidious red flags, the tiny tears in the perfect facade she presented. The way she would accidentally spill dark red wine on my pristine white dress at important social events, always accompanied by profuse, yet oddly unconvincing apologies. Or how my food, whenever she had helped with the cooking, invariably seemed to have an extra, almost overpowering amount of seasoning, occasionally leaving a strange, lingering aftertaste. The incidents had started small, almost imperceptible at first, an unexplained upset stomach here, a mild allergic reaction there, that doctors couldn't quite attribute to anything specific. James, always quick with an excuse, would dismiss my concerns with a reassuring pat on my arm. Maybe it was just something you ate earlier, he'd suggest, his brow furrowed with feigned concern. Or you must be coming down with something, honey. But the pattern, once I allowed myself to see it, had become chillingly clear. It was a slow, systematic escalation. The worst episode had occurred just 2 months prior, a harrowing experience that had landed me in the hospital for 3 days. I had consumed breakfast at their house, a seemingly innocent bowl of oatmeal and a glass of orange juice. Within an hour, I was convulsing, my body racked with a pain so intense I thought I might die. The doctors, baffled and concerned, found traces of an unidentified substance in my system. But James, with an almost uncanny ability to manipulate perception, had convinced everyone, including the medical staff, that I must have simply taken some expired medication by mistake. The sheer audacity of his lies, the casual way he dismissed my suffering, now filled me with a cold, hollow dread. My grip tightened on the doorframe of the study, my knuckles white against the wood. I watched every nerve-ending screaming as Nina took another sip of the coffee. James, meanwhile, appeared utterly oblivious, his thumb moving rapidly across his phone screen, engrossed in something seemingly unimportant. My own untouched cup sat cold and inert on the table where I had left it, a silent sentinel to the unfolding drama. The metallic, chemical smell still clung tenaciously to the inside of my nostrils, a phantom odor that made me shudder involuntarily. A subtle tremor in Nina's hand, almost imperceptible, caught my attention. Her fingers, usually so steady and elegant, were now visibly trembling as she lowered the cup. Her face, moments ago composed and confident, suddenly drained of all color, turning a ghastly shade of pale. James, she said, her voice thin and reedy, laced with a nascent fear that sent a thrill of morbid satisfaction through me. Something's wrong. James looked up from his phone, his expression shifting in an instant from casual distraction to a horrifying dawning realization as his eyes locked onto the cup in Nina's hand, the one she was drinking from. He jolted upright, his chair clattering loudly as it toppled to the floor behind him. "Nina, what's happening?" he demanded, his voice laced with a sudden, raw panic. Nina's hands were now trembling violently, uncontrollably. Her body began to sway. I feel," she stammered, attempting to push herself up from the table. But her legs gave way, and she stumbled, grabbing the edge of the table for support, her knuckles white, her eyes wide and terrified, fixed on James. "James, what did you put in that coffee?" She gasped, the words barely audible. At that precise moment, I stepped out of the study, my phone already in my hand recording. The red light on its screen glowed, a silent witness. James was instantly by Nina's side, his face ashen, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "That wasn't supposed to be your cup," he whispered, his voice low and choked with a desperate urgency. But in the sudden, echoing silence of the dining room, his words carried with chilling clarity, a damning confession hanging in the air. Nina's eyes widened further, not just with fear now, but with a dawning, terrible realization of betrayal. Her gaze flickered between James and me, understanding blooming in her terrified eyes. "Call an ambulance," she gasped, her voice hoarse, as her legs finally buckled beneath her. She slid to the floor, a crumpled heap of silk and panic. "Please, I can't." My hands, surprisingly steady despite the overwhelming chaos erupting before me, immediately dialed 911. Nina lay on the polished floor, her body racked with violent, uncontrollable tremors. James knelt beside her, his face a mask of escalating panic, his plan having backfired spectacularly and lethally. "Emergency services." I spoke clearly. my voice resonating with an almost clinical detachment, while my other hand continued to hold the phone, ensuring the recording remained active. Yes, we need an ambulance immediately at 1542 Maple Grove Drive. My sister-in-law appears to be having a severe reaction to something in her coffee. She's conscious but experiencing significant tremors. As I relayed the information to the dispatcher, Nina's wide, terrified eyes locked onto mine. The usual cold, calculating intelligence that typically resided in her gaze was utterly gone, replaced by raw, primal fear. "Christina," she gasped, her voice weak. "You switched, you knew." "Ma'am, the ambulance is on its way," the dispatcher assured me, oblivious to the deeper drama unfolding. "Please stay on the line." James was growing more frantic with each passing second, his carefully constructed composure unraveling before my eyes. "Nina, what's happening?" he pleaded, his voice cracking. "That wasn't supposed to, it wasn't meant for."
Shut up, James!
Nina snapped, her voice a guttural growl through gritted teeth. For a fleeting moment, her anger seemed to momentarily overcome her physical distress. Her eyes, still fixed on me, burned with a furious resentment.
This is all your fault.
"You said it would just make her sick enough to miss the board meeting next week. You promised it wouldn't be traced." My blood ran cold. The board meeting. The highly anticipated, crucial board meeting scheduled for next week, where I was slated to present my meticulously crafted proposal for a major client account. The very same account, the Henderson account, that Nina had been desperately trying to land for months. A fiercely contested prize between our two competing marketing firms. Everything, suddenly, terrifyingly, clicked into place. The pieces of the puzzle, once disparate and confusing, now aligned with a sickening precision. "The tea last month," I said, my voice, to my own surprise, remarkably steady, devoid of the tremor I felt running through my core. "And the breakfast incident 2 months ago. Those weren't accidents, were they?" Nina's face contorted with another wave of pain, a spasm of agony that made her double over. "The tea," she choked out, clutching her stomach. "That was supposed to keep you home during the Johnson contract presentation. But you went anyway, damn you." She looked up, her eyes glazed with pain and resentment. "James said. He said we just needed to discredit you, to make clients think you were unreliable." The distant, rising wail of sirens filled the air outside, a harbinger of imminent arrival. James, his face a mask of terror, stood up, stumbling backward, putting distance between himself, Nina, and me. "Nina, stop talking," he hissed, his voice low and urgent, desperation clawing at his throat.
You don't know what you're saying.
"I know exactly what I'm saying." Nina spat back, her words beginning to slur slightly, her focus entirely on me. "We've been planning this for months, James! Ever since Christina started outperforming me at every single client meeting. You were supposed to make sure she drank it today. You were supposed to ensure she was out of the way for good." Just then, paramedics burst through the front door, their urgency a stark contrast to the dramatic tableau inside. I quickly stepped aside, giving them room to work. As they efficiently loaded Nina onto a stretcher, attaching various monitors, I calmly stopped the recording on my phone. With 2 precise taps, I sent the damning video file to my private email address, then, for good measure, to my lawyer. James stood frozen, a statue of despair, watching as his carefully constructed world crumbled around him, his carefully laid plans exposed and irrevocably shattered. "I'll ride with her to the hospital," I told the paramedics, my voice firm and clear, projecting an air of concern that masked a deeper, colder resolve. "After all, I need to make sure my sister-in-law gets the proper treatment." My eyes met James's terrified, desperate gaze. A chilling smile touched my lips. "And I'm sure the doctors will be very interested in knowing exactly what was in that coffee." The emergency room at Nashville General Hospital was a maelstrom of controlled chaos. Doctors and nurses moved with practiced efficiency, a blur of scrubs and hurried whispers as they worked to stabilize Nina. I sat in the sterile waiting room, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh, unforgiving glow, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. I replayed the recording of Nina's confession, listening to the frantic tremors in her voice, seeing the raw panic in her eyes as her carefully constructed reality imploded. It was all the evidence I needed, tangible proof that this was not, as I had once desperately tried to believe, mere paranoia on my part. This was real. This was malicious. "Family of Nina Anderson," a nurse called out, her voice cutting through the low hum of the waiting room. I rose immediately, noting James's conspicuous absence. He had mumbled something about parking the car nearly 20 minutes ago, an obvious excuse to flee, and had yet to return. "I'm her sister-in-law," I stated, following the nurse through the double doors into the restricted area. "How is she?" The nurse's expression was grave, professional but laced with concern. "She's stabilized, thankfully. But we've found concerning levels of toxins in her system. The doctor would like to speak with you about some unusual findings in her blood work." Dr. Phillips, a tall woman with shrewd, intelligent eyes set in a face framed by streaks of graying hair, was waiting by Nina's room. Her posture exuded authority and quiet competence. "Mrs. Bennett," she began, her voice calm and measured, "could you please tell me exactly what happened before your sister-in-law became ill?" I took a deep, fortifying breath, bracing myself for the difficult revelation. My hand automatically went to my phone. "Dr. Phillips," I said, "I think you should listen to this first." I played the recording from brunch, the chilling confession filling the quiet hospital corridor. I watched as the doctor's professional concern deepened, her expression shifting to one of grave alarm. She reached for her tablet, beginning to make rapid notes. "This is very serious," she murmured, her eyes flicking up to meet mine. "The substance we found isn't something that accidentally ends up in coffee. We're looking at deliberate contamination." Just then, James appeared at the end of the hallway, his face a ghastly pale, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead. He had clearly overheard the doctor's damning words. "Christina," he started, taking a hesitant step towards me, his voice a desperate plea. "Let me explain, please. Stay back." Dr. Phillips warned, her voice sharp and authoritative. She pressed a call button on the wall, summoning security. "Security to room 4112, please." James raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, a pathetic attempt to appear innocent. "This is all a misunderstanding," he stammered, his eyes darting frantically between Dr. Phillips and me. Nina was confused. She didn't know what she was saying. "Really?" I asked, my voice laced with icy disbelief. I pulled up the text messages I'd discovered on his phone last week, the ones I'd secretly forwarded to my own device. An act born of a deepening, undeniable suspicion. "So these messages between you and Nina, about making sure she's out of commission before the Henderson presentation, were just friendly conversation, were they, James?" His face drained of all remaining color, leaving him looking like a ghost. "You went through my phone," he whispered, horrified. "After I found the strange, unlabeled pills hidden in your desk drawer." "Yes, James, I did," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the furious trembling I felt deep inside. I turned to Dr. Phillips. "Deaker, I've been hospitalized 3 times in the past 6 months with unexplained, debilitating symptoms. I'd like to know if they match what you found in Nina's system today." The doctor's eyes narrowed, a glint of steel in their depths. "We'll need to run some comparative tests, Mrs. Bennett. In the meantime, security will make sure your husband remains available for questioning." 2 security guards appeared almost instantly, positioning themselves on either side of James, effectively trapping him. He looked utterly cornered, his carefully constructed facade of innocence crumbling into dust. "Nina and I," he stammered, his voice pathetic. "We were just trying to help you slow down. You were working too hard, taking all the big clients." Nina said if we could just make you take some time off. Be poisoning me. My voice was a low, dangerous whisper, steady despite the tremors that now ran through my entire body, a fury barely contained. How long have you been doing this, James? Was it you who tampered with my food at the Christmas party too? The one that left me with a severe allergic reaction and unable to attend the pitch meeting. James's silence was all the answer I needed. Behind him, through the glass panel of Nina's room, I could see her lying in the hospital bed, connected to various monitors, her face pale and drawn. Her earlier bravado, her sharp-tongued anger, was completely gone, replaced by the stark, undeniable fear of someone who knew their elaborate, malicious schemes had finally, irrevocably, caught up with them. Detective Mendoza is on her way, Dr. Phillips said quietly, her eyes still on James. She'll want to take statements from everyone involved. I nodded, feeling a strange, profound sense of calm settle over me. The truth, after months of agonizing uncertainty and self-doubt, was finally, irrevocably coming out, and there was no turning back. Detective Mendoza arrived within the hour, her presence commanding immediate attention in the sterile, hushed hospital corridor. She was a seasoned investigator, her reputation for handling complex cases, especially those involving domestic abuse or manipulation, preceding her. She listened with intense focus, her dark eyes sharp and perceptive, as I played the recording from brunch and then displayed the incriminating text messages I had copied from James's phone. Mrs. Bennett, she said, her gaze steady, as she reviewed her notes on a small pad. You mentioned previous hospitalizations. Can you tell me more about those incidents, specifically the dates and your symptoms? I pulled out my phone again, opening a meticulously maintained document I had been quietly compiling for months, a secret chronicle of my increasingly suspicious ailments. The first time was in February. I began, my voice remaining clear and unwavering. After a dinner at Nina's house, I experienced severe stomach pains, intense dizziness, and extreme fatigue that lasted for days. The second was in April, the tea incident, which led to a near collapse and a trip to urgent care. And then again in June, after breakfast with them, I ended up hospitalized for 3 days with similar, but escalating symptoms. Each time, the symptoms were similar, yet just subtly different enough that the doctors couldn't pinpoint a definitive cause, often attributing it to a virus or food poisoning from an unknown source. The detective's eyes narrowed, her expression hardening as she scanned my detailed log of dates, specific symptoms, and the precise circumstances surrounding each incident. And you've been keeping records since then? She asked, her tone reflecting a mixture of surprise and professional respect. Ever since I noticed the pattern, I confirmed. I hesitated for a moment, then reached into my purse, pulling out a second burner phone I had acquired months ago. I also started carrying a backup phone with a different, untraceable number. I used it to discreetly record conversations whenever I was around them. My fingers quickly navigated the interface. I have several recordings where Nina and James discussed their plans, though they were careful not to be explicitly incriminating. But with the context of everything else, it becomes clear. I played one of the recordings. Nina's voice, though distorted slightly by the covert nature of the recording, came through clearly, laced with a familiar blend of frustration and calculation. The Henderson account is worth millions, James. We can't let her ruin everything we've worked for. Just stick to the plan. A few days of illness should be enough. James's response, though quieter, was equally damning. I've got something stronger this time. She won't make it to the presentation. This will put her out of commission for good. Gex. Detective Mendoza's expression hardened further as she listened to the chilling exchange. Through the window of Nina's hospital room, I could see my sister-in-law was now awake, looking significantly less confident and composed than she had been at brunch. The monitors hummed softly beside her bed, The hospital is running advanced toxicology screens, the detective informed me, her gaze returning to mine. Phillips has already identified several substances in Mrs. Anderson's system that do not occur naturally. We'll also need full warrants to search both their homes and offices for any further evidence. A sudden commotion down the hall caught our attention. James was arguing vehemently with the security guards stationed outside Nina's room, his voice rising in desperation.
I need to speak with my wife,
he shouted, his words echoing in the sterile corridor. Christina, please, you don't understand. We were trying to protect you. Detective Mendoza stepped between us, her stance firm and unyielding. Mr. Bennett, she stated, her voice sharp and authoritative. You're not helping your case. We've already found evidence of premeditated. James interrupted, a hollow, mirthless laugh echoing through the corridor, a sound devoid of any humor. He looked utterly bewildered, seemingly unable to grasp the gravity of the situation.
We were just trying to slow her down.
She was working herself to death, taking all the major accounts. Nina said if we could just make her take some time off, by poisoning her. Detective Mendoza's voice was a whip crack, cutting through his pathetic excuses. That's not protection, Mr. Bennett. That's attempted murder. The color drained from James's face completely. Murder? He stammered, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. No, that's not. We never meant to. Then what exactly did you mean to do, James? I asked, my voice surprisingly calm, even as the full weight of his betrayal crashed down on me. When you put something in my coffee this morning, what was supposed to happen? James's subsequent silence spoke volumes, a profound admission of guilt that needed no words. Behind him, through the hospital room window, I could see Nina watching us, her face a mask of fear, but also of calculation. I wondered if she was already, even in her weakened state, trying to formulate a new narrative, attempting to figure out how to spin months of systematic poisoning as some sort of misguided, yet noble, attempt at helping me. Well, need both of their phones. Detective Mendoza told the security guards, her voice clear and decisive. And I want officers posted at both doors. Nobody leaves until we get the toxicology results. Dr. Phillips entered Nina's room, a tablet in hand, her expression grim as she reviewed the newly arrived test results. Detective Mendoza and I followed, while James remained outside with the guards, his head buried in his hands. Nina tried to sit up straighter in her hospital bed. A fleeting attempt at defiance, but the tremors hadn't completely subsided, and she slumped back against the pillows. The toxicology report shows elevated levels of several substances in Mrs. Anderson's system, Dr. Phillips announced, her voice clinical and devoid of emotion. Most concerning is the presence of a particular compound that's typically used in highly regulated pharmaceutical testing. It's not something the general public should have access to. Nina's face paled further, her eyes darting nervously. That's impossible, she whispered, her voice barely audible. James said it was just something to cause mild symptoms. Nothing serious. Mild symptoms. Detective Mendoza interrupted, pulling out her notebook, her pen poised. Like the ones your sister-in-law experienced over the past 6 months, Mrs. Anderson. The door opened again, and another detective entered, holding an evidence bag. We found these in Mr. Bennett's office desk at the Anderson marketing firm, he reported, presenting several small, unlabeled bottles with clinical-looking labels, along with a stack of meticulously detailed notes about dosages and observed reactions. I felt my knees weaken, a wave of nausea washing over me as the full, horrifying scope of their calculated plan became sickeningly clear. You were documenting everything, I whispered, my voice thick with disbelief and revulsion, like some kind of experiment. It wasn't like that, Nina protested weakly, but her voice wavered, betraying her. We just needed to track what worked. The first few attempts weren't effective enough. You kept showing up to meetings anyway, so you increased the dosages. Detective Mendoza concluded, examining the bottles, her expression grim. Did you know these substances could be lethal in higher concentrations? The room fell into a chilling silence. James, still visible through the glass window, sank heavily into a chair in the hallway, his head buried in his hands, his body language radiating absolute defeat. The Henderson account, I said slowly, pieces clicking into place with a horrifying inevitability. It wasn't just about that presentation, was it? You needed me out of the way permanently, because the client specifically requested me as their lead, and they wouldn't work with anyone else. Nina's face contorted with a mixture of anger, fear, and a flash of raw, desperate envy.
You were ruining everything,
She spat, her voice regaining a fraction of its former venom.
I built that client portfolio for years.
And then you show up, barely 3 years into the company, and suddenly everyone wants to work with you. Instead, James said he could fix it. He said he could make you disappear. By killing me. The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. A brutal truth that crushed any lingering illusions. We weren't trying to. Nina started, but Dr. Phillips cut her off, her voice sharp and unequivocal. The concentration of the substance in the coffee you drank today, Mrs. Anderson, the doctor stated, looking directly at Nina, was significantly higher than any previous samples we've analyzed from Mrs. Bennett's earlier hospital visits. If she had consumed that dosage, the outcome would have been severe, possibly fatal. Detective Mendoza turned to the other officer. We'll need a full warrant for both their homes and offices immediately. And contact the pharmaceutical company listed on these bottles. Find out exactly how they obtained these substances. Nina slumped back against her pillows, the fight draining from her face, leaving her looking utterly defeated and small. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she whispered, her voice barely audible, tears welling in her eyes. James kept saying we just needed one more try. I stepped closer to her bed, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands, a righteous anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. Every time I got sick, every meeting I missed, every client I nearly lost, you were both there, watching, taking notes on how your poison was affecting me. What kind of people does that make you, Nina? What kind of husband does that make you, James? The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant sounds of the hospital. Outside, I could hear James being read his rights as additional officers arrived to assist. Nina stared at her hands, unable to meet my gaze, her face a mask of shame and despair. Detective, I said, turning away from my sister-in-law, a sense of grim finality settling over me. I'm ready to make my formal statement now. The trial lasted 3 harrowing weeks, though each day felt like an eternity. I sat in the courtroom, a silent observer, watching as the prosecution methodically, chillingly, laid out their intricate case against James and Nina. The evidence was overwhelming, a tidal wave of undeniable proof. The confiscated bottles from James's office, still bearing their cold, clinical labels. Their meticulously kept, hand-written notes detailing each poisoning attempt, a horrifying journal of their escalating malevolence. The irrefutable recorded conversations, snippets of their whispered plans, their motivations laid bare. And, of course, the damning text messages that had served as the initial, undeniable confirmation of my deepest fears. What struck me most profoundly throughout the entire agonizing proceedings was their demeanor. Nina, once so polished, so effortlessly confident, seemed to shrink in the defendant's chair, her once commanding presence reduced to a small, pale figure. James, for his part, couldn't even bring himself to look at me, his eyes fixed on the floor as expert witnesses, one after another, detailed the potentially lethal effects of the substances they had been callously using against me. Dr. Phillips's testimony was particularly damning. She presented a comprehensive, clinical analysis, showing precisely how James and Nina had gradually increased the dosages over time, a clear, horrifying demonstration of their intent to cause not just harm, but potentially fatal harm. The representative from the pharmaceutical company confirmed, under oath, that James had indeed stolen the compounds through a college friend who worked in their research department, an act that further illuminated the premeditated nature of their crimes. The defendants displayed a calculated, escalating pattern of behavior. The prosecutor argued passionately in her closing statement, her voice echoing with righteous indignation. This was not merely corporate sabotage. This was a systematic, deliberate attempt to harm Mrs. Bennett, with a clear escalation that, as we've heard, could very easily have resulted in her death. When the verdict was finally read, a hushed reverence filling the courtroom, I felt no surge of joy, no triumph. Only a profound, bone-deep sense of relief, as if a crushing weight had been lifted from my soul. Both James and Nina were found guilty on multiple counts, including attempted murder and conspiracy. The judge's words resonated through the silent courtroom, each one a hammer blow of justice. The premeditated nature of these actions, she stated, her voice stern and unyielding, carried out against a family member over an extended period, demonstrates a profound disregard for human life and trust. This demands the maximum sentence. I watched a strange detachment washing over me as they were led away in handcuffs, their faces a mixture of shock and despair. I thought about how greed, envy, and an almost pathological jealousy had twisted two people I had once, foolishly, trusted into something utterly unrecognizable. Their once promising careers, their carefully cultivated reputations, their very freedom all sacrificed, crumbled to dust in a twisted, desperate attempt to destroy me. 1 year after the trial, a full 12 months since the verdict, I stood at the podium of the Nashville Business Leaders Conference, the vibrant energy of the crowd buzzing beneath me. I was preparing to deliver the keynote speech. The irony was not lost on me. This was precisely the kind of high-profile opportunity that Nina, in her twisted machinations, had desperately tried to prevent me from achieving. The Henderson account, the very client she and James had been so desperate to steal, had not only flourished under my leadership, but had also become a springboard, leading to several more major clients and firmly establishing me as one of the top marketing executives in the region. Success isn't just about talent or hard work. I began, my voice clear and confident, my gaze sweeping across the sea of expectant faces before me. It's about integrity. It's about resilience. And fundamentally, it's about building genuine relationships based on unwavering trust. I paused, letting my words sink in, allowing their full weight to resonate. Sometimes, I continued, my voice imbued with a newfound wisdom, the biggest threats to our success come not from external competitors, but from those closest to us, from within our own perceived circles of trust. But surviving those challenges, confronting them head on, that is what truly makes us stronger. It refines us. It builds character. After my speech, a throng of young professionals approached me, their eyes bright with ambition and determination, eager to seek advice. One young woman, her face earnest and hopeful, asked how I had maintained my composure, my drive throughout such an unimaginable ordeal. I focused on what I could control. I told her, my voice gentle but firm. I gathered evidence meticulously. I trusted my instincts, even when they whispered terrifying truths. And most importantly, I refused to let fear, or the actions of others, stop me from pursuing my goals and building the life I deserved. Later that evening, as the last rays of sunset painted the Nashville sky in hues of orange and purple, I received an email from the Henderson client confirming their decision to renew their contract for another 3 years. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. I thought about how profoundly differently things might have turned out if I hadn't listened to that nagging instinct, that intuitive sense of dread, that fateful day at brunch. The local paper had run a small, inconspicuous article that morning about Nina and James beginning their lengthy prison sentences. I hadn't read it. Instead, I focused intently on the detailed proposal for my newest, most ambitious client project, a wave of calm purpose washing over me. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the best revenge wasn't about seeking vengeance or dwelling on past injustices. It was about moving forward. It was about thriving. It was about achieving success, magnificently and unapologetically, despite those who had tried so desperately and failed so spectacularly to hold me back.